Okay, so you're probably seeing those headlines right now about potential trade escalations and
Mm.
maybe even feeling a bit of, that familiar uncertainty creeping back in.
Mm-hmm.
We've all been there.
Yeah.
Well, today on the deep dive, we're going to tackle this thing head on. President Trump's announced reciprocal tariffs and all this talk about a global trade war heating up.
Yeah, it's a big one.
It is a big one, and we've been going through a really insightful BBC News YouTube video. It's really interesting. It gives you a real-time look at how people were analyzing and reacting to this as the news broke.
Right.
So our goal today is to unpack for you exactly what these potential tariffs could mean, for the markets, for businesses big and small,
Yeah.
and just for the global economy as a whole.
The whole picture.
The whole picture. Exactly. We're going beyond just the surface level news here and trying to really understand what are the core issues at play and what kind of domino effect could this all have.
Yeah, because there's a lot of layers to this one.
Absolutely. And to help us do that, we'll be hearing from some of the key voices that were featured in that BBC report. And that includes President Trump himself.
Okay.
We'll hear from Kathleen Brooks, who has some really sharp insights. She's from XTB. We've got Michelle Fleury from the BBC reporting on the ground.
Great.
Ludi Powell, who's a business owner, so we get that perspective.
Okay.
Former Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross.
Oh, wow.
And then to round it all out, we have Philip L., who's a trade expert from the LSE.
Fantastic. So we're going to get, the view from all sides.
Yeah, all the different angles.
Yeah.
Okay, are you ready to dive in?
Let's dive in.
Okay, so let's start with this. It's kind of striking, isn't it, how this whole thing feels a bit like a rerun in some ways.
It really does. Yeah.
Like we've seen this before, and yet you can just tell the markets are like on edge.
Oh, absolutely.
They're nervous.
Yeah, and that BBC report highlighted how as soon as Wednesday was announced as this possible liberation day for all these reciprocal tariffs, stock markets in both Europe and Asia, they just started heading downwards. And the fundamental worry, and I think Kathleen Brooks really nailed it here, is just that we don't know.
The unknown.
The unknown, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, what will these tariffs actually look like? Which products are they going to hit? And then which countries are going to be targeted? It's that lack of clarity, especially after, we've seen some unpredictable moves on trade in the past.
Right.
That's what's making investors so nervous, because how do you plan for the future when you have no idea what the rules are going to be?
Yeah, you can't run a business like that.
Exactly.
It's that chaotic rollout, as Brooks put it so well.
Yeah.
That really seems to be at the heart of the market's anxiety.
Makes sense.
Because initially there was some speculation that maybe certain allies, like the UK, they're having those ongoing trade discussions.
Right.
Maybe they'd be exempt or at least see some delays.
Right.
But then President Trump comes out and says all countries will be affected.
Wow. So no one gets a pass.
No one gets a pass. And it kind of just extinguished any hope that maybe things would be different this time. And it just ramped up that anxiety. And, when you really boil it down, the core concern that's fueling this whole market sell-off is that tariffs are just generally seen as this drag on economic growth.
Right.
Because think about it. If the cost of goods goes up because of all these taxes on imports, that means consumers and businesses have less money to spend.
Less disposable income.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that could lead to a decrease in spending all across the board.
Yeah, and that's what everybody's worried about.
Absolutely. And then if we connect this to the bigger picture,
Yeah.
it's not just about reduced demand. We're also talking about the fear of inflation roaring back.
Oh, that's a good point.
Because we've just come out of this period where rising prices were a huge concern.
Right.
And the last thing anyone wants is for that to come back with a vengeance, because now imported goods are more expensive because of these tariffs.
Yeah, that would be a tough one.
And then on top of that, we have to consider just the sheer scale of the financial impact that we're talking about here. That BBC report mentioned a pretty staggering number. It said $5 trillion.
$5 trillion with a T.
With a T, has been wiped off the value of U.S. stocks since President Trump's initial trade actions.
That is a lot of money.
And that's not just some abstract number.
Yeah.
That represents real wealth that's been eroded and a real loss of confidence among investors.
Yeah, that's a figure that definitely makes you stop and think.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It makes you think about just how big the consequences could be. And the concerns go way beyond just the immediate impact on financial markets.
Of course.
We're talking about potential knock-on effects for the entire global economy.
Yeah.
The whole intricate network of international trade relationships could be affected.
Right.
And even geopolitics and the diplomatic ties between countries could be strained.
It's all connected.
It is. And as Brooks said, the markets just They don't know how to price Trump in this time around.
That's a good way to put it.
There's just this unpredictability, this known unknown.
Yeah.
And that makes it incredibly difficult for investors to try to anticipate what's going to happen with the economy and make informed decisions.
Yeah, you're basically flying blind.
You are. And it also brings up a really important question about some of the assumptions that people are making.
Okay, I'm listening.
Because there's this narrative out there that these kinds of tariffs will automatically boost the U.S. economy.
Right, I've heard that.
Like it's a guaranteed win. But the data that they cited in that BBC report kind of casts some doubt on that.
Oh, really?
At least in the short term.
Yeah.
Because we heard that U.S. stock markets have actually fallen more than European markets so far this year in 2025.
Okay, interesting.
And the U.S. dollar, it's the weakest it's been among the major currencies. So the idea that this is a slam dunk win for the U.S. economy,
Yeah.
it's looking a lot more questionable, especially in the near future.
Especially in the near future.
So let's shift gears a little bit
Okay.
and talk about how all of this is playing out for businesses on the ground.
Okay, let's get down to the nitty-gritty.
Because the uncertainty and the anxiety is palpable.
Yeah, I bet.
Michelle Fleury's reporting really highlighted how many businesses in the U.S., they're basically in wait-and-see mode.
Just holding their breath.
They're just trying to figure out what these potential trade actions will mean for their bottom line.
Right.
How will they make a profit? What do they need to do to plan for the future?
Yeah.
And businesses that import European goods, especially wine cellars,
Okay.
they're being hit hard because there's this possibility of 200% duties on EU alcohol.
200%.
200%.
Wow.
And that's on top of the trade disputes and retaliatory tariffs that are already in place.
So it's like a double whammy.
It is, and it's really scary for them.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
And what's really revealing is the impact this could have on smaller businesses.
Okay.
They told the story of Flatiron Wines and Spirits. It's a small importer, and their whole business relies on bringing in French wines.
Okay.
And a 200% tariff, it's not just a price hike that they could absorb.
Right.
It could literally make their products impossible to sell.
Wow.
It could shut down their business completely, and people could lose their jobs.
Yeah.
So it's a very real example of how these big policies
Right.
can have devastating consequences for real people.
Real people's lives.
And you also see how consumers are reacting to all this uncertainty.
Yeah. How are people responding?
The report mentioned that some people are buying up their favorite European wines, like Champagne, Burgundy Barolo,
Stocking up.
stocking up, because they're worried that prices are going to spike
Smart.
or that they won't be able to get these wines at all.
Right.
And they even had this example of someone planning their wedding and they're buying all the wine now.
Wow.
Because they're scared of what the tariffs might do.
That's wild.
And it just shows you how this uncertainty seeps into everyday life.
Yeah, it's not just numbers on a screen.
Exactly. It's real people making real decisions.
Absolutely.
But here's the thing. Despite President Trump's very strong belief that the U.S. is getting a raw deal in global trade and that these tariffs are the way to fix it, there's a lot of skepticism among businesses about this whole approach.
So they're not all on board.
Not at all.
Yeah.
But then you have someone like Ludi Powell of Diallo's Fine Foods in Little Italy,
Okay.
and he offers a really interesting counterpoint.
Okay, what's his take?
So this guy, he's been selling imported Italian goods for like 100 years.
Wow, 100 years.
So his business is directly in the line of fire when it comes to these potential price increases.
Right.
But he's still supporting the president's actions.
Wow, that's interesting.
He says he believes that the pain from tariffs is a price worth paying because he feels like the U.S. has been giving away the store in trade deals for years.
So he's taking the long view.
He is, and it's important to hear that perspective
I agree.
because it shows that even among the people who could be really hurt by these tariffs,
Yeah.
there's still support for what the president is doing.
It's more complex than it seems.
Exactly. It's just that maybe they see some bigger benefit down the road
Right.
or some strategic goal that's worth the short-term pain.
Yeah, like they're willing to sacrifice now for a better future.
And then you have Wilbur Ross, the former Commerce Secretary,
Okay.
and he's saying this shouldn't be a surprise at all because President Trump has been talking about tariffs for years.
So it's not like this came out of nowhere.
No, it's been part of his platform.
Right.
So maybe there's a level of predictability there, even if the exact details are still fuzzy.
Okay, that makes sense.
But then we have the trade expert, Philip L. from the LSE,
Okay.
and he's offering a much more cautious assessment.
Uh-oh.
He basically said, nobody knows what's going to happen.
Not very reassuring.
And he even suggested that maybe President Trump himself doesn't have a fully formed plan yet.
Wow.
And he really emphasized how damaging this uncertainty is for American businesses.
Of course.
Because how are they supposed to operate, invest, set prices
Right.
when the whole landscape of trade could change overnight?
You can't make long-term plans when everything's up in the air.
You can't, and as Philip L. pointed out, all this uncertainty is leading to a drop in business confidence,
Yeah.
which means less investment in future growth and innovation.
That's not good.
It's not. And then he threw out this warning about the potential for stagflation in the U.S. economy.
Stagflation.
That's that really nasty combination of slow economic growth and high inflation.
Oof. Yeah, that's a tough one.
And it's a serious concern because it suggests that these policies could push the U.S. economy in a really bad direction.
Yeah, no one wants that.
No one wants that, but it's a real possibility.
Mhm.
And then Philip L. goes on to analyze President Trump's motivations.
Okay, interesting.
And he points to what he calls a misplaced view of trade.
A misplaced view.
He says there's this belief that importing goods is bad and only exporting is good,
Oh, I see.
and that having a trade deficit means you're automatically being ripped off.
Interesting.
And he suggests that there might be a misunderstanding of how tariffs really work, because people think that they mainly hurt foreign countries, but a lot of times it's domestic consumers who end up paying through higher prices.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And the whole idea of these tariffs, bringing manufacturing back to the U.S. and creating jobs,
Right.
while that sounds good in theory, Philip L. is pretty skeptical.
Okay.
He says that the unpredictable policy environment and the fact that building factories takes time and a lot of investment
Right.
makes it unlikely that we'll actually see a big resurgence in American manufacturing.
So it's not a quick fix.
It's not. And his final thought was that whatever happens with these tariffs this week, it's probably not going to be good news.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, it's a bit of a sobering assessment.
It is.
But to recap everything we've talked about today,
Okay, let's sum it up.
the main takeaway is that there's a huge amount of uncertainty surrounding these reciprocal tariffs,
Right.
and the financial markets are reacting negatively.
Makes sense.
Businesses are feeling the pressure, and they're divided on whether the potential long-term benefits outweigh the immediate costs.
It's a gamble.
And the experts are warning us about the risks of stagflation and questioning the economic logic behind all of this.
So it's a complicated situation.
Very complicated, and as Philip L. said, even the experts aren't sure what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
But hopefully this deep dive into the BBC's analysis has given you a better understanding of what's going on.
A more well-rounded perspective.
Exactly. We wanted to get to the heart of the matter and explore all the potential consequences.
And I think we did a good job of that.
I think so too.
Yeah.
But this all leads to a final thought that I want to leave you with.
Okay, hit me.
Historically protectionist trade policies, like these tariffs, they haven't been good for global economic growth.
Right.
And a lot of times they end up hurting the countries that put them in place.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, we're hearing from American business owners who are actually supporting these tariffs.
So that's the paradox.
It is, so the question is, what else is going on here?
What are we missing?
Are there deeper reasons or maybe longer-term strategic objectives that go beyond just the immediate economic stuff that we've been talking about today?
That's a really good question. Something to think about.
Something to think about.
Yeah, it's definitely a complex issue with a lot of layers.
Definitely food for thought.
Food for thought, exactly.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
My pleasure.
Until next time.
See you then.